Welcome to our 9th ever Art Slides lecture and the first set of art slides for Unit 4. We don't have many more of these left to go. Today's topic, as you can see, is early Christian and Byzantine art. Initially, these two terms have some overlap, but as we will see in this unit, they become increasingly separate. Early Christian is primarily a historical term rather than a stylistic one, and it refers to Christian works of art from roughly the first 5 centuries CE. Now, as you ought to recall, Emperor Constantine moved the Roman capital from Rome to Byzantium and also legalized Christianity. But his move to Byzantium, rather than unifying Rome, eventually serves to create a divide between East and West. So Byzantine refers to a style of art that developed in and around Byzantium. Some early Christian art may overlap with Byzantine art, but they will continually grow apart as they become distinctly different cultures, with Byzantine in the East and Christianity in the West. Our first slide is a painting from the town of Dura Europos, on the edge of the Roman Empire, which was discovered in 1922. Excavations reveal that a number of different religions were practiced there. Among other religious buildings, there is a Jewish synagogue with murals depicting scenes from the Old Testament. This particular painting, Moses giving water to the 12 tribes of Israel, is less narrative and more emblematic. It doesn't depict an event as it would have happened, but rather uses symbolic imagery. Moses stands in the center, drawing water from a well. The water flows from the well to 12 men standing in tents. These men each represent the 12 tribes of Israel. The men stand with arms raised up in a prayerful stance. Above the well is a menorah, such as the one on the Arch of Titus, housed in a Corinthian portico. Notice that Moses is a blend of bearded Old Testament patriarch and Roman statesman wearing a toga. This convention of depicting biblical characters in what would have been modern clothing is something that we will continue to see in the centuries to come. Next up, we have a good example of the blending of Greco-Roman classical styles with Christian themes and imagery. The Good Shepherd depicts a young man carrying a sheep to be slaughtered as a sacrifice. Notice the fairly naturalistic style and the continued use of the contrapposto stance. If you will recall, the contrapposto stance is characterized by a human figure placing most of its weight on one foot so that the shoulders and arms twist off the axis of the hips and legs. It is generally thought to look more natural. As with the painting of Moses, this piece displays the mixing of Christianity and Roman culture. In this case, it conflates Christian meaning with pastoral and sacrificial traditions of Greece and Rome. Here we have another example of early Christian art, the Sarcophagus of Junius Bassus. Junius Bassus was a prominent Roman senator who was said to have converted to Christianity shortly before his death. His coffin is meant to convey this conversion. As Dr. Blackburn talked about last week, it will become increasingly common to see politicians ascribing to Christianity. In fact, it will become nearly impossible to work in politics in some areas without at least pretending to be a Christian. This sarcophagus is an excellent example of the importance that was placed on Christianity and the sort of social and political power that claiming Christianity could confer upon an individual. The side shown here depicts scenes from the Old and New Testaments, with the exception of one that is a common image known as Traditio Legis, or Christ the Lawgiver. In order from left to right, top to bottom, you can see the sacrifice of Isaac, the arrest of Peter, enthroned Christ, or the Traditio Legis, 2 scenes of the trial of Jesus, Job on the dunghill, Adam and Eve, Christ's entry into Jerusalem, Daniel in the lion's den, and the arrest of Paul. The sides at the foot and head of the sarcophagus depict typical Roman images of the four seasons. Up next, we have our first true icon. An icon is not just a piece of art, but it is a sacred image used in religious worship or devotion. Most icons depict Christ, the Virgin Mary, or any of the numerous canonical Christian saints. They most often take the form of paintings on wood, although their materials and style vary greatly. Going forward, we will see a lot of icons in our humanities art slides. This particular icon is a mosaic and may be found in the mausoleum of Empress Galla Placidia in the Roman city of Ravenna. The mosaic fills a large lunette, a semicircular wall surface, just over the interior of the entrance. Christ is shown here as a shepherd, a metaphorical role often used to describe him in the New Testament. He is depicted being surrounded by 6 sheep while holding a cruciform martyr's staff that alludes to his coming crucifixion. His gold robe indicates his status as royal emperor and king of heaven, and the 3-tiered rock on which he sits indicates the Trinity. Christ's pose, as well as the foreshortening and shadowing of the sheep, indicate the continuation of Hellenistic naturalism, which will eventually give way to flattened images in Christian art. Before moving on, it is important that we establish some architectural vocabulary regarding traditional church floor plans. What you see here is a fairly common layout for churches that has been around for centuries. While some of the churches that we will look at will depart from this structure, they will still contain the same elements. First, the narthex is an antechamber or porch located at the western entrance, opposite the church's main altar. Second is the nave, or the central part of the building where the congregation gathers. Next is the transept, which is a north-south cross-section dividing the altar from the nave and giving the church its cruciform shape. The 2 wings formed by the transept are often used as small chapels, sometimes containing religious relics or areas for prayer. Lastly, we have the apse at the eastern side of the church. The apse is typically a semicircle and usually contains the altar. It is also important to note that early churches were always built with the narthex on the west side and the apse and altar on the eastern side. This is because early Christians always prayed while facing east. Reasons for this are not certain, but many believe it is due to a belief that Christ will return in the east. In our first example of Byzantine and early Christian architecture, we have the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Built under the reign of Emperor Justinian, the Hagia Sophia is a basilica. The word basilica has lots of different connotations. It sometimes refers to a building that is oblong in shape, with a double row of colonnades and a semicircular apse. It may also refer to any sort of Roman public building that fulfilled a number of uses, such as town forum. In a more modern setting, a basilica may be a certain type of church that has been granted special privileges by the Pope. In this case, basilica primarily refers to the shape. The name Hagia Sophia is Greek, meaning holy wisdom. Justinian had the church built in an effort to rebuild the city after suppressing a destructive revolt in 532 CE, and it is an impressive mathematical and architectural feat. The central dome rests on 4 arches at right angles, rather than on a drum as in typical Roman architecture. The arches are supported by buttresses, which can be seen from the outside. Originally built as a church, the building was filled with Christian mosaics. This artwork was largely covered with Islamic decoration when the city of Istanbul was conquered by the Turks in 1453 and converted into a mosque. It was at this time that the four towers, or minarets, were added to the exterior corners of the compound. As your textbook notes, the Hagia Sophia has been a museum for some time now. However, this has recently become an inaccuracy. Just this summer, the Turkish government allowed for the building to be converted back for use as a mosque once again. Following the Hagia Sophia, we have another example of early Christian architecture, San Vitale, a church located in Ravenna. Also built during the reign of Justinian, this church was built as a part of his effort to unify Christianity across the Roman Empire. The church is dedicated to Saint Vitalis, a Roman slave and martyr of the Christian faith. He had become something of a cult figure by the end of the 4th century CE. The interior of San Vitale is decorated with marble and some of the most vibrant and elaborate mosaics from this period. The mosaics make excessive use of gold, giving the light in the building a consistently bright, warm, yellow glow. San Vitale is what we call a centrally planned church, simply meaning that it is designed around an inner circle, rather than being laid out in a more common cruciform church. The altar of a centrally planned church is sometimes placed directly under the central dome. In some, however, the baptismal is placed under the dome. You can see here that despite its different shape, it still contains the main aspects of church architecture that we covered earlier. Here we have one of San Vitale's many mosaics that I mentioned earlier. This mosaic depicts Empress Theodora and forms a pair with another mosaic depicting her husband, Emperor Justinian. She is shown here with her court ladies on the right and two churchmen on the left. Notice that we are already seeing a departure in style from the icon of Christ as the Good Shepherd. There is very little attempt to depict shading or depth. Instead, the figures are fairly flat and not naturalistic. Furthermore, there seem to be some inconsistencies in perspective. While Theodora's halo is a flattened circle, the baptismal fountain on the left is shown at an unnatural angle so that the water in the bowl may be clearly seen. Similarly, the apse mosaic in San Vitale features very little attempt to portray shading, perspective, or depth of space. This image depicts Christ hovering over the globe, draped in royal purple robes. He is flanked on either side by angels and hands a jeweled crown to Saint Vitalis, who stands on the left. On the right, we can see Bishop Ecclesias, the man who commissioned the building of San Vitale. Again, this mosaic depicts a shift away from naturalistic forms toward flattened conceptual images and figures. Lastly, today we have an icon of Saint Peter found at the Church of St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai, Egypt. This is more indicative of the icons that we will see moving forward. It is a panel painting rather than a mosaic. Icons, once again, are pieces of art that portray Christ, Mary, or one of the saints for the purpose of devotion. Given that most of you probably weren't raised in Catholic or liturgical churches, these may seem a little odd to you. They are, however, still prevalent today. A common misconception about saints and icons is that people pray to them rather than praying to God, and this is sometimes construed as a form of idolatry. The actual tradition of the communion of the saints, however, involves Christians asking that saints would pray for them, much as we would ask a friend or family member to pray for us. Most saints are associated with particular prayers, depending on what they were known for in their lifetimes. Icons identify their saints with particular objects, clothing, or settings. In this case, Peter is identified by the set of keys that he holds, given that tradition holds that Peter possesses